This is, let's start the meeting. This is the Village of Lake Bluff Historic Preservation Commission. This is a special meeting, a special listening center on proposed historic preservation regulations. It is February 16, 2021. This is our fourth of 4 listening sessions. And to start the meeting, Glenn, if you could call the roll, please.
Certainly. Member Bergman.
Here.
Member Church is absent. Member Liebolt is absent. Member Minor.
Here.
Member Nickel.
Here.
Vice Chair Richardson, excuse me.
Here.
And Chair Kraus.
Here.
You have a quorum.
We have a quorum. Second item on the agenda, as is our policy, we provide a few minutes at the beginning of each meeting for individuals in the audience, either live or virtual, to make a presentation or ask questions of the Commission on an area that is within our purview and is not otherwise on the agenda. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to so present? Seeing none, let's move in to our listening session. I believe we have 3 attendees, at least that I'm seeing on my screen. And perhaps we can start by asking if any of the attendees have any particular areas or questions that they would like us to review or discuss.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, would you like, typically we've done our presentation and we've given them the ability to speak and send video. Would you like us to do the video part now?
Yes, let's do that now. I thought since it's such a small group, we'll see if there's specific questions and then we can do a quick version of our presentation.
Okay, so just by way of introduction, if you're joining us, you're able to send video and audio. Feel free to jump in at any time. We just ask that unless you're speaking that you keep your microphone muted, help us keep a clear audio recording going forward. So thank you for joining us.
So does anyone have a question or a comment before we start? No? Okay. We do have a short presentation to go through the bigger picture, the philosophy of why we are making the proposals for changes to the historic preservation ordinance. One of the things we heard loud and clear in the feedback from a couple of months ago, we had quite a few individuals giving us feedback, and one of the things we heard was why are we doing this? Why are we making suggestions for change? So this quick presentation is designed to answer that, and we've got 5 topical areas that we'll go through. The first focus area is really the overarching reason for doing preservation, and that's through education, encouraging having a bias for preservation and rehabilitation in Lake Bluff. And the flip side of that is to discourage demolition of those structures that are deemed symbols, or what we're calling anchors, that represent the community to its residents and to its visitors. So that's our first big picture. What we're trying to do is create this bias, this mindset of preservation within the community. And we're doing that in a couple of different ways. I'm going to start with the last sub-bullet here. One of the things that's often overlooked is the fact that the Lake Bluff Historic Preservation Commission is a certified historic preservation commission, which means that property owners who wish to rehabilitate a landmark, a historic property, are eligible for state, local, and in some cases national historic preservation incentives. If there are specific questions on that, we can talk about that. There's information on the village website about what incentives are available. The most important one is the property tax freeze that lasts for quite a few years. again, to encourage renovation. But that's one of the roles that we fill as being an organization that enables property owners to access those incentives. Second thing that we do is to promote owner-nominated landmarking. A landmark is a designation of a specific property as important in the social, cultural, architectural history of the village of Lake Bluff. Our preference, and what almost always happens, is that the property owner wishes to nominate their property for landmarking. We encourage landmarking. We encourage owner-nominated landmarking, and we will continue to do that going forward. The thing that's different in this proposal is a special database that we're at this point calling Choose Lake Bluff, that is designed to take some of the uncertainty around what is a landmark, what is a designated historic structure in the village, by putting that information online. So once we have we'll show you our beta site. Once this is up and running, anyone, residents, visitors, interested property owners, will be able to look at one data repository and identify for any property in the village the history of that property. We'll also be able to look at the county information around real estate tax, around the service areas, the education, the high school, the local school districts, but a lot of information in one place that is designed for folks to really have an understanding of a property they're interested in and its historic background. We don't want people to be surprised when they fall in love with an old house, and then with the intention of demolition, and then discover that it is a landmark or that it is considered to be one of these anchors within the community. We want those buyers to go into a purchase discussion with all of the information that they can have. So Glenn, if you would run through a quick demo of what Choose Lake Bluff database will look like.
Certainly. So by way of introduction, this beta, if you would, has been around for, gosh, over a year now. It goes by fast. But what you're seeing here is a visual representation of all of the data the village has gathered about various properties, individual homes, through its historic surveying efforts. So on 4 occasions, the village has retained a professional in the field of architecture and historic preservation to survey areas of the village and to document the condition of houses, the history of their development, and really the one field sometimes we boil it down to is just capturing their rating as an expert of the historic significance of houses to the development of the village and based on various standards. So what we've tried to do here is, before you had to consult a written publication or look at individual files in a binder in the Lake Bluff History Museum or et cetera, and we've tried to make that data more accessible. And what we have here is really an application that lets you do that in 2 ways, right? The first is, let's say you're interested in a particular property. We can take, actually that's not the best example. Let's take.
Can you blow that screen up a little bit, Glenn? Can you make that a little bigger?
Sure. So we can try, it's a bad example as well. We take 419 East Prospect Avenue, for example, which is a village landmark. If you click the survey record, you'll see that data we have on hand from the original survey. One of the tasks that's before us is that volunteers at the museum have spent a considerable amount of time supplementing the paper copies of these documents, the originals. We need to look back, and there's a data entry piece of incorporating this into our electronic database, into our copy. But you can see that it captures, of course, basic information about the property. It captures that local significance rating, and the surveyor's evaluation of if this would qualify for the National Register or be contributing to a National Register district. It includes information about the condition of the structure, and then as available, information about the architectural classification and the roof type and the windows, significant features. If it's available, we get into the historic name and the architects and the original cost of construction. Again, more of this information exists for many properties in the village and needs to be integrated into this. And then to some extent, there are just many properties in the village that, haven't risen to the level of having a deep dive conducted. But this is meant to be an evolving product. The second piece of functionality, of course, aside from just looking at one particular property, is really to understand the historic context of the village. So if you're a property owner or a prospective purchaser, of course, playing around on Street View can tell you a lot about your neighborhood now, and that's the world we live in, but you can also learn about other properties in the village. Let's say you have a home built in the 1960s. You can see, as it were, your home's peers throughout the village, if that entertains you. If you're interested in a notable local architect, or if you know your home was built by a notable architect and you're interested in seeing those peers, you can do that too. For example, we have some David Adler properties in the village at 700 Arbor, at 982 Sheridan, at 1010 Green Bay Road. And so you can, as we have data available, you can identify those easily and have the chance to look into them a bit further to entertain your curiosity. Right now, this shows the results of the first 3 village architectural surveys. The 4th one includes much of the area of the village, many of these white areas, and we're still incorporating that data in. Again, working on a plan to incorporate in data from the museum. And also one minor setback is that the state of Illinois is in the process of changing how they publish historic data right now. And so we will need to go back and retool some of that process as well. But I think we hope an accessible product, and one that helps make the efforts that this commission and the village has invested in documenting this more accessible, more useful to residents and to your work.
Could you go back to the base page and describe what the colors mean?
Sure. So if you're here looking at an overview, and I'll zoom in a little bit so it's helpful, we have a hierarchy that we've created, right? These are tentative colors. We might find something a bit more suitable, but the grays are structures that our surveyor designated as not contributing, perhaps because they've been too altered or they're too new, or et cetera. The greens are contributing, but not necessarily significant. So by way of example, you can look at 515 Glen. It's, you can see the assessor's picture here at a click, but it's a relatively normal house. So contributing and being a good example of development in the village, but not necessarily, a remarkable example, right? The cyans, or the bright blues, if you would, are significant. The dark blues are locally designated landmarks. And then the reds and pinks, we're getting into properties that have been recognized on the National Register. So there's a handful that have been given National Register designation on their own. And then there's a National Register district that encompasses a commercial district that encompasses much of the original buildings in the central business district.
Okay, thanks. This is an ongoing project. It will take a few more months to get the data where we want it to be. I would suspect we've got a year or so to populate all the data that we want, and hopefully we'll have a place for property owners to be able to upload floor plans and building information that they think is important for that property on the same website. Thank you. Can we go to focus area number 2, please? So this is the process step, what the Historic Preservation Commission is in the business of doing, and that's to review the structures within the village for their appropriateness as village landmarks. A village landmark, again, is an individual property that is deemed to have historic, cultural, social history within the village to such a degree that it is becoming one of the anchors, or is one of the anchors of the streetscape within the village. So one of our objectives is to identify existing village landmarks, which Choose Lake Bluff does. It's the whatever color, I forgot what color it is already, but you can identify the landmarks within the village just by looking at that website. The second thing that we will become much more aggressive on is to identify structures likely to be nominated as a landmark. We've been in this business for 15 plus years, and we're looking to finish our landmarking, provide certainty in historic designation so that property owners and future property owners will know whether their home is a landmark or whether it is likely to become a landmark within the village. And we intend to complete that landmarking process in at least 3 years from the date of the ordinance passage. So what does landmarking mean? We go to focus area number 3. So what if we have a landmark? What are we attempting to do by designating certain structures as anchors within the village? Well, one of the things that we heard loud and clear when there was no Historic Preservation Commission in the village was that residents were often surprised that they would, walk to the train station in the morning and see a house with work going on, and walk back from the train station at night and see the house demolished with no advance notice, with no community input, with no opportunity to give an opinion or to discuss potential options for use of that property. So what the ordinance does is allow meaningful time for community discussion and input on demolitions or on significant modifications to those community anchors, to those structures that are important to set the context for what Lake Bluff was. Those structures that visually represent Lake Bluff and its history. So how do we do that? How do we know what structures to look at? There are 3 things here to think about. The first is the general concept of demolition. So which houses do we look at? When there's a building permit or a demolition permit request that comes to the village, any structure that is 50 years or older is going to go through a historic preservation review. If there are demolitions or significant modifications. Significant modifications, by the way, we're only interested in exterior. People can do whatever they want in the interior without review, without any additional administrative oversight. But we're interested in demolitions and exterior modifications that entail at least 50% of the exterior wall of the structure. So if you own a home that is less than 50 years old, or if you own a home that is more than 50 years old, but you're making changes, adding something to that home, but it doesn't it won't impact 50% of the exterior walls, then you're not eligible for a review. But if it is a significant modification or a demolition, then the Historic Preservation Commission goes through a review process. That review process has different steps for non-landmarks or for landmarks. So non-landmarks are those structures that have not been designated by the village as a community anchor, as a landmark. So there may be delays that are applied to a proposed change, but again, there's the 50% of the exterior wall. The maximum delay that can be imposed on a non-landmark is 180 days. The intent of the Historic Preservation Commission is to make this a very quick process in most cases. We'll show you in a minute what we've done around reviews, and we'll give you a hint at a fast track process. But if there's a non-landmark, the proposal increases the maximum delay to 180 days for an opportunity for review. That's a maximum. So what if the structure is a landmark? What if the structure has gone through village board activity in the past and it is considered to be an anchor within the community? These are the properties that are subject to enhanced scrutiny. These are the properties that the village board has determined are subject to a higher standard of protection. And as a result, any request for demolition may be delayed for up to 365 days. It's important to note here that the ultimate decision for use of the property rests with the property owner. The only authority that the village has is to delay, depending on status, non-landmark or landmark, to delay demolition or to delay alterations for a specified period of time in order to generate and receive community input and discussion around potential alternative uses. And Glenn, could you show how quickly we have done some of these reviews over the last couple of years, please?
Certainly. So what you're seeing is, briefly, is the same chart twice. The chart on the right is a subset of the data on the chart on the left. So on the y-axis, you have the number of reviews this commission has done. And then on the x-axis, you have three categories. The first to the farthest left is the reviews that have taken in total 35 days or less, which is generally just one meeting of this body in their discharge at the first meeting. The review's concluded. The second column is those that are taking between 36 and 71 days. That's generally two meetings. And the last column is those taking over 71 days. Those are typically held for over 3 or more meetings of this board, and generally those go to the maximum length of time permissible under the ordinance. So what you're seeing on the left is from 2005 to the present, which is the entire history of our Historic Preservation Commission. You can see that roughly half or a little less of your reviews are conducted and concluded in one meeting, roughly a quarter or a little more, 2 meetings, and then a quarter or so go 3 meetings or longer. What you see in the right-hand chart is more recent memory, more mature period of our ordinance, and it also corresponds to my tenure with the village. So these are items I'm more comfortable speaking to personally, of course. And you can see the overwhelming majority of these are conducted and concluded in one meeting. You just have one instance where something took 2 meetings, and then a couple instances where something extended beyond that point. One of those was the demolition of a landmark, and the other involved a proposed demolition, subdivision, demolition again, designated landmark, etc. A prolonged process that did ultimately result in the preservation of a landmark in the village. So I'm happy to answer any questions on this chart, or to turn it back over to Chairman Kraus.
Yeah, so the point of this chart is to demonstrate that even though the ordinance provides for a review by the Historic Preservation Commission for structures 50 years or older, the review is not intended to be onerous. We want these reviews in the vast majority of situations to be less than 30 days, so that the property owner who's excited about changing their house or building a new house, that they can go about their business with a minimum of internal delay. So in order to do that, our fourth focus area is very specifically around minimizing procedural delays. So we want to make this a simplified process. So we want the review procedures to be simple. We want to minimize procedural delays. And one of the main ways to do that is our development of a fast track historic preservation review process. so that the vast majority of structures won't even need to come before the commission. The vast majority of structures will be able to be reviewed very quickly within that 30-day time period, and only those structures and all landmarks where there are changes or demolition requests will go to the full commission for review. So that's one of our objectives. The last focus area is one that's gotten has had a lot of discussion, and that's the creation of historic districts. The way we're thinking of districts now is a situation like this. If a group of your neighbors are interested in finding out how they can preserve their streetscape, how they can, for a long time, maintain for themselves and for future owners and for their neighbors the sense of community, the sense of the neighborhood that now exists. So we think it's appropriate to provide a process that enables property owners to nominate their property and others as a historic district. But the nomination would be made only by property owners, and there would be a voting process that would be put in place. The idea, again, is for property owners who are interested in preservation, not just of their structure, but of their neighborhood, would have an opportunity to explore making that happen. And those are the 5 focus areas. That's the end of the only formal part of this presentation. Let's open it up for any questions or observations that our audience might have.
And Mr. Chairman, I did see that a couple other people joined us at some point during the presentation.
Great.
We'll bring them up as well. Again, you're welcome to turn on your video and to jump in to speak when you like. We just ask if you're not actively speaking that you keep your microphone muted. Just help us to reduce background noise on the recording.
So, hi.
Hi. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was waiting for you.
Oh, okay. I'm Beth Coughlin, and he's David Wong, and we live at 701 East Prospect Avenue, right in Chairman Krause's backyard.
Right there.
And this is the first meeting that we've been able to attend, so maybe some of what I have on my mind has already been discussed in other meetings. But so we bought and moved into our house in 1995. It was built in the 1880s by the Swift family. It's in the bright blue color on Mr. Cole's chart. And at the time we bought it, we had lived someplace else in Lake Bluff, which was also really old. But when we bought this house, there was still a lot of camp meeting era houses around, and we watched them over the years be torn down one by one by one, and we've tried to, both our house had been on the market for 2.5 years, I think, before we bought it. It was in quite bad shape. The garage, Steve probably remembers this, had burst into flame one afternoon and burned down.
Yep.
Before we bought it. So we've tried to renovate. We've made a few additions. We rebuilt the garage, but we've been thwarted in so many ways along the way, trying to stay in the period and modernize the house. When we rebuilt the garage on the old footprint, and then the village changed the rules, and the exclusion for garage space reduced. So suddenly part of our historic garage became our living space, and so that limited other plans. The first thing we did was the garage, but the kitchen was falling apart. The back part of the house was falling apart. So, and then the front porch was in really bad shape. It was screened. We took down the screens to repair the front porch and sort of bring it back more to the original style. And we were told we couldn't put the screens back up because then it would count as living area. Just on and on. Part of our house, the sun porches to the west they're enclosed. They're originally probably sleeping porches, but they're enclosed and they go right to the property line. So they limited what we were able to do when we added an addition, renovated the kitchen and added an addition. The house is built like an old railroad, I think it's called railroad style or rail car style. So you can go in and come out from the front, or if you're upstairs, you have to go all the way from the back of the longhouse to get down the front stairs to get out. So we wanted to build a stairway outside so that we'd have an emergency stairway. We took that to the zoning board to sort of run it by them. They gave us such a hard time about that idea. I just feel like, you know, yeah, and now, you know, we're older and maybe want to sell, and of course we don't want the house to be demolished, but if that's what a new owner wanted to do, what can we do? You know, there's like, I guess I just feel like there should be some, if you're going to go ahead with this, there should be some leeway for owners to make changes that don't have to fit so tightly within the modern building codes. I feel like we haven't been able to do many things we would have liked to do to make it better for us. And who knows how attractive it would be to a young family. We don't have a finished basement, et cetera, you know, all the things that go with the age of the house. It's been a wonderful home for us and our family, but I feel like this is almost coming a little bit like we've endured all the restrictions, and now this will add another restriction in a different way if we wanted to get out of our house. So those are my comments.
Okay. And thanks for maintaining that beautiful house. I'm not sure if you know that my house and your house and our neighbors was a compound, and all that.
Do you remember the shared sewer backup? We
Oh,
were
yeah.
on the same sewer line, as it turned out, because we were all shared. Yeah. Somebody
So thank you
for
for
yeah.
Thank you for doing all the rehab, and it can be a struggle. One of the recommendations that we are making to the village board is, and unfortunately it's after you struggled, and frankly so did I, in making changes to the house, but it's recognizing that older houses have very specific needs, peculiar needs, and that our houses, your house and my house, were built before there was such a thing as a zoning ordinance. So the zoning ordinance is sort of plopped onto our property, and now we have to live with it. And zoning is great. Zoning provides nice setbacks and provides, space between homes, and provides height restrictions and all of those good things. But we are proposing that if a property owner who wishes to develop their property, wishes to landmark their property as an anchor, as there certainly is within the village, we are recommending that the village board consider, and the PCZBA, Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals, consider flexibility in application of the zoning provisions. So that if you have a historic home, if you're willing to improve it and hopefully get some tax credits for that, or tax freeze, that working with our commission, with the HPC, that a property owner will be able to think about realistic rehabilitation or improvements of the historic property that may be slight infringements of one or more zoning regulations. So we think a discussion needs to happen for historic properties, especially on small lots, what we used to call heritage lots, that allow a property owner to bring a property up to current standards with its exterior facade pretty much in the same way that they found it, but be able to provide flexibility with the zoning code to be able to make that house more livable. So we recognize that's an issue. We're hoping to work with the village board in very specifically allowing those kinds of discussions to occur up front so that the administrative disappointments can be hopefully minimized. Now, I was in total agreement with what you said until you came to your last clause, which was if you want to sell the house, you may now have more restrictions on selling as a result of this proposal, if I paraphrase that correctly, and help me understand what you mean by that.
I mean that if a potential buyer would look at the house and like the lot and want to tear the house down and do their own thing, they would be faced with substantial delays, in they want to do with the house. So it might be a disincentive for people to purchase.
Okay. There are, and I assume you know that there are demolition delays that exist now. So we're not proposing that we add those the delays. We are recommending they be increased, especially for landmarks, for those homes that are landmarks, and be increased moderately for those homes that are non-landmark. Again, for the community to have discussion about the future use of that property. But yes, the demolition, we've heard this from some of the other sessions, that there are some concerns about buyers who wish to come into the village to tear down a house and build a new one, that they may be discouraged from doing that. And we acknowledge that that might happen. We also think that if there's another side to that story, that if there is an attempt, if the village can create a community that has a bias for preservation, that attracts people like you into the village who want to maintain a historic home, and we provide the correct incentives to make that happen, that the village may become a destination for individuals who are looking to buy and rehabilitate historic structures within a historic village, within the historic context. So we think there are two sides to that discussion. I absolutely understand the concerns around flexibility and selling. But one of the things that we want to do is to make sure that for folks like you, and frankly, folks like me, we're not going to be here forever. We've been here a long time, won't be here forever. That there's some certainty so that if I want to put my home on the market, I will know for certain where it falls in the delay process and kind of build that into my my sales plan.
Sorry, I'm taking this family taking a lot of your time. One sort of more philosophical look at the situation. I mean, based on the pictures we have of this house, and maybe the next door's house, I mean, we know this is a father-son exact duplicate of house. The picture of the 1880s house is so different from the house we're looking at today. And based on some of the, the investigation of digging the history, realized this house was totally facelifted somewhere around 1950s, probably from a Sears catalog, some sort of modification, and made this very weird, the outside appearance. So we know this house was lived by the Swift family. It was, this has a a more cultural related significance. But this house is not really a Swift house anymore by any imagination. So when we want to preserve a whole house like such, we're really preserving the Sears catalog timbers today is for most of part of this house. So what are we trying to, I mean, would this be any significance in terms architectural preservation versus a cultural, historical, significance preservation? Will you make this difference, make the in terms of classification, and how do you landmark them?
Certainly, that's part of the discussion, and both of those are attributes that are considered in determining a landmark. So we have structures within the village that are obviously architectural gems, the other houses that we looked at. Many others within the village that haven't had the facadectomy that yours had, and mine had too in the 50s. And just by its architectural design and architectural relevance would be considered landmark eligible. There are a lot of other homes that may not have the architectural cachet, but because of their social history, they're important anchors within the village. In your situation, the Swift family and the history of the Swifts in the village and in the North Shore, and also part of the camp meeting area, which is a whole other part of social history. So it's both of them. It isn't one or the other, and it isn't necessarily both, but it's social. A third thing that came to mind is that, and I had the same thing, I actually uncovered an old photograph of my house that shows what the original facade looked like, which is very different than the facade we have now. Gingerbread, and then lateral and horizontal flashings. And gosh, if I were younger, I might think of taking the skin off again. I did that once, taking it off, and now that I know what it originally looked like, putting it just like it used to be. So to the degree we uncover those kinds of photographs, we can help property owners and future property owners have information about what the exterior of the house used to look like, and maybe provide financial incentives and certainly the zoning flexibility, if they wish, if that's in their master plan, to be able to do that. That's our hope.
Can I add a point here?
You sure can.
Okay. Sir, you brought up the cultural history of the Swift family, and then mentioned that the house was refaced in the 1950s. I would wonder if it was actually refaced probably in the mid-1930s. A lot of the cottages, as they converted from being truly summer cottages to four-season, year-round winterizing cottages, were refaced in the 1930s. So it may be an older refacing than you think. If it was actually done with Sears lumber and a Sears project, that's something that adds to the value of the house. And so we're not trying to preserve the house at a particular point in time. We're trying to preserve the entire house and the entire history of the house. So we would bring the social history. We would be interested in preserving the social history of the Swift family, who had a significant impact on creating the Camp Meeting Association. Essentially, it was their money that really got a lot of that up and rolling. And then from there, the fact that the house evolves over time becomes part of the social history of the house. What you explained earlier about the trips that you've made to the zoning board, I think your house at this point becomes a wonderful candidate for rehabilitation. And you can, I don't know if you're of the age and the financial means and all of that. I mean, we all have those questions to answer, but if you were to go through the landmarking process, landmark the house and follow the landmarking guidelines that the State Historic Preservation Office utilizes, you could end up with the 8-year plus 4-year tax freeze on the property. So there's some significant financial benefits to you for going through the process of rehabilitating the house, and that includes rehabilitating the interior as well as the exterior of the house. And our HPC Commission has, well, we have done on several points for several homes, we have written to the zoning board on your behalf, or on the owner's behalf, recommending zoning changes and saying, please allow the zoning changes to this particular house because that helps incorporate the historic nature of the house. One of the very first houses that we were involved with as a sitting HPC board is a house at 210 Center Avenue. And there, in order to rebuild the house so that it looked like, they actually tore down the old house and rebuilt it so that the new house looks like the old house. And in order to do that, they needed several different zoning variances because you're talking about a side setback. They have a bay window on their dining room that literally overhangs the lot line by about 3 or 4 inches. And they have a railings on their porches, which are under ADA regulations required to be 40 inches tall, come way up high, and the house had railings that were down at knee level. And so we recommended that they make those, we recommended to the ZBA that they make those changes. The ZBA agreed. So it pains me to hear that you've made trips to the village and not been able to rehabilitate your house. I think your house is one of the sweetest little houses on Prospect Avenue and certainly typifies what we think of as the camp meeting era and that wonderful sweet part of Old Lake Bluff. And so I would be certainly in favor, excuse me for choking, I would certainly be in favor of working with you or perhaps the next owner, I can't speak to that, but working with you to recommend a myriad zoning changes in order to get your house rehabilitated. Most certainly, putting the screens back on the porch. I think that would be a fabulous idea. So I'll be quiet from here. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Paul that not having the screens on, I don't understand that. But
no, it was a very careful calculation of living space, and if the screens were up, it counted as living space.
Yeah, sure. I was.
The HPC did not really exist at that point in time, or not at least as it is now. This was 1998.
Yeah.
So
yep.
a different time. So.
Yeah, and you know, there's a place for calculations. The calculations have to happen, and if there's an issue, then there's another level that we have to go to with historic homes. Okay, so under the current zoning code, you can't do that, but does that really make sense? Somebody needs to help you ask that question.
Yeah.
And that's what this commission considers to be their job, if we can move forward and do this work. Do others have questions or comments that they'd like to share with us? Anything on how we are proposing to deal with the potential for historic districts? Okay. Go ahead.
You know what? I do. Steve, it's Deb Fisher. I do have a question on whether in this process, anybody's done any kind of checking to see locally. I'm not talking Boston, and I'm not talking, apples and oranges kind of, but locally, maybe Lake Forest, certainly as the most logical, closest neighbor. Ms. Coughlin's question about or what I was hearing maybe is what the impact on value might be to some of this. You know, Lake Forest obviously has a historic district, East Sheridan Road. It has rules. To see, you know, the amount of additional time, if any, do they sell faster? Do they sell slower? Do they sell higher? Do they sell lower in price? You know, is there a concrete kind of mathematical thing that I know it's been mentioned that the idea is that historic districts are better and return value more and such. I'm just curious whether any kind of calculation or anything has been looked at here.
There have been we have looked at a lot of them. There are varied opinions, as you know, on historic districts. Without being crass, the people who believe in historic preservation will typically have a study that will find that, guess what, the more you do historic preservation and the more that you identify historic districts, the greater long-term the value of the homes within that district. And the key is they're long-term. It may have a short-term impact that looks different. On the other hand, individuals who are less interested, no, let me not put it that way. Individuals whose goal is to maximize property value for the property owner typically have, as a result of their studies, that a focus on preservation and a focus on having a district will potentially lower the rate of increase in property values. It won't decrease property value, but it might lower the rate of increase. And it might also make the property harder to sell at the point of sale. There are so many differences of opinion. I don't think there is any one or dozen reports that we could consider to be, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Mr.
Sure.
Chairman, if
I wish there were.
I can add one point to that. If you go to the City of Rockford's website, you can pull down a beautiful report that is written by the City of Rockford on the historic districts in downtown Rockford. We don't necessarily think of Rockford as being a historic community, but it has actually quite a long and very important history in the state of Illinois. They did a study comparing two parts of their old riverfront. One side of the street became a historic district, the other side of the street did not. And so you have a very easy apples to apples kind of comparison there of one is the same neighborhood essentially cut in half. And there they measured not only increase in value, but they measured the increase in building permits, number of building permits, value of building permits, and the tenancy in rental units. And so if you have some time, you might want, it's not a terribly long report, but it's a very interesting report to take a look at. So if you want to look at that, it can give you a very nice understanding of the methodology of comparing communities together. So it's very difficult, as Steve said, it's very difficult to measure whether there's been an increase in value or not. And the City of Rockford report can explain a lot of those little nuts and bolts to you if you're interested in that. Probably no more than a 20-25 minute read.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Glenn, you had something?
Oh, I was just, again, for interest, I don't mean to belabor the point. From a technical standpoint, studies like what you describe are done from time to time, Ms. Fisher. If I recall it right, the best method of doing them is called a hedonic value method. I mean, there's really two, right? One is you look at property values retrospectively, and one is a surveying-based method. What I would say is, and if you're interested, the classic study is back in the mid-2000s. It's a study of greenbelt trails in Louisville and their effects on property values. What I would say is it takes a great deal of data to try and isolate signals like that. As you know firsthand, there are very many things that go into how a piece of property is valued, and one intervention is very difficult to piece that signal out of the noise, if you would, especially as we think about some of the changes our real estate market has seen in the last 10, 15 years, et cetera. Certainly, I would say wearing my hat as a staff liaison to the Planning and Zoning Commission and then to Historic Preservation, there are bad policies that can be implemented well that are good for communities, and there are great policies that can be implemented poorly that are bad for communities. I think that's probably true here, and I would say certainly that if I could make any reassurance, as you know, much of the North Shore is subject to some variation on these rules. That makes it some of the most, that's some of the most expensive property in Chicagoland, which by extension means some of the most expensive property in the country and the world, which is a little bonkers to think about. But I figure it can't be. There's plenty of room to find a policy that works, I hope.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, we're trying to find a sweet spot here. With the end point is the property owner can ultimately determine what they want to do with their property. So that there's some people who don't like that. There's some people who think that, and many of our neighboring communities have certain categories of preservation where the village can say no. And that's not the way Lake Bluff has been. That's not the way we're proposing that Lake Bluff continue, that the property owner maintain their right to do what they want with their property. However, for selected properties, these anchor properties, we felt 15 years ago when this was put in place now, we still feel that community input and flexibility for property owners is appropriate, and potential delays are appropriate to give the community a sense of comfort in knowing that 25 years from now, we will still look like Lake Bluff. Houses will change. Houses always change. There's some great new houses in Lake Bluff. There's great new housing stock. There's great rehabilitated houses. We want to see that same mix going forward. So we're trying to find a balance between those points. Okay, any other questions or comments before we go into a general discussion of our next steps? Okay, you could keep the mics open, Glenn, if anyone wants to comment at any point during this meeting, that would be great. So our next steps. I'm going to ask the indulgence of my commissioners because I want to have another special meeting. And I think we'll figure out a date in a little bit, but here's why. What I would like to do is to have a meeting to discuss our recommendations, to actually take the feedback that we've had in 4 meetings, put them in the form of changes to our original proposal for ordinance modification, and have a robust discussion around those changes. And I'd like to do that fairly quickly because I would like to, at a regular meeting next month, Wednesday, March 10th, I believe is our next regular meeting. If there is a consensus on changes, I would like to move our recommendation back to the village board and see how the winds blow at the village board level. So that's my plan, and what we need to do, and we can discuss some of that now if you wish, but we need to think about really 4 major areas. And by the way, I'll have with Glenn and I will have a discussion draft out to this group relatively soon that will talk about and summarize what we've learned in these feedback sessions and put a modified recommendation together that will have 4 pieces. One is how a landmark is designated, what the process is, why we're doing it, and also we haven't talked about that tonight yet, the double handful of properties that we will be studying for additional landmarks, this certainty concept. So that's one whole stream of conversation. The second is what I call implications of landmarking. So if we do have a landmark, what does that mean? As opposed to a property that is not landmarked. And in there, we have not only the delays, but we also have the positive sides, the property tax freezes, the incentives, the zoning flexibility, any other financial incentives that we might have. So that's kind of the second piece. The third piece is non-landmarks. So what happens if there's a change or a demolition to a non-landmark? What's the specific process for that? And then the fourth and final is the process, nomination, analysis, and voting process around owner-nominated landmark districts. So those are really the 4 buckets that we need to think about, and we'll have a document that we can go through at our next meeting. The other thing that we need to think about is because we have committed to, in prior meetings, that we will, again, to have certainty, so a property owner will know if their home may become a landmark, if we are considering it for a landmark. So we need to develop our list of properties in the village that we will be reviewing over the next couple of years and proposing for landmark status. We need to publish that. So if you recall, those of you that were on the commission a year and a half ago, we had begun a process. Paul called it the Nifty 50. Remember that? So I've taken a spreadsheet that identifies every significant structure through the historic surveys, every significant structure in the village. I've added the 4th survey data for the terraces, and I have some background information about all of those properties, including which of them are landmarked, which of them are National Register, which of them are the History Museum's Distinguished Home Award. So there's a spreadsheet under the development that we can use, as well as Paul's information, and Sherry provided her thoughts around potential landmarks. So we'll have that to talk about at our special meeting as well. So I'll stop there. Any thoughts from the commissioners on that?
Steve, are you going to share that spreadsheet with us before that meeting then?
Oh yeah. So the spreadsheet, as well as the discussion drafter on the proposed changes to the document. Okay. So we'll have 2 very specific things that will have integrated hopefully the comments that we heard over the last couple of weeks.
Well, and the comments that were shared before these listening sessions started as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. I'm sorry, yes. The 56 comments, those will all be there as well. We've got the comments documented. I will have a sheet similar to the one we looked at before that will have the comments from our feedback sessions.
Those letters that were submitted to the village, were those published anywhere? Because typically when people write letters in, they're added to the minutes of the meeting.
Yeah, they were in the minutes of the village board meeting. They were in the packet for the village board. They were also distributed to this body when it was remanded back to us. Okay. I think you have a copy of those.
I saw a summary, but not the actual letters.
Okay. Glenn, could you send the link to those?
Yes, we certainly have them in one place, as you can see. Oh, go ahead, Ms. Miner. I apologize.
I might have missed them, but what I recall is a summary.
I know they came in after we published The packet for the HPC's October meeting, really, after, they came in the couple days leading up to the village board meeting, so we may have only shared them back by email. I'm not sure they would have been published, perhaps in the commissions, perhaps in their November memo, there's a link. But we have all of those hosted online in a file. We can send those out tomorrow. And certainly whenever this comes back through in more formal staff memos, we'll continue to share those. If you look in the Plan Commission's agenda tomorrow, you'll see short-term rentals similarly was a topic with a great deal of public comment, and we've made sure to preserve that and to continue to provide access to it when that comment has come back on the public agenda.
Thank you.
Glenn, those went out by electronic format at one point. I sat and read all of them in one sitting. They all came in one huge email attachment prior to a meeting. So they have at least circulated at least once electronically.
Yeah, and being somebody who doesn't like to read things from the computer, I printed them all off and I have them authorized for it.
I did the same thing, Steve. I have copies of all of them too, because
we'll make sure
I like to have that paper in my hand.
Yeah, well, and then I can write on them. So we'll make sure.
And you're right, Margaret, there were about 50 of them.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm looking at next week, Monday or Tuesday night, for another special meeting. Glenn, we have 2 other members that we'll need to survey. What does Monday or Tuesday look for this group?
Mr. Chairman, actually, I apologize. We would not have access to this, to the system we need to conduct this meeting on Tuesday. So we would on Wednesday. We could do Monday or Wednesday here at Village Hall, or even perhaps Thursday if that's necessary.
Don't we have a publication deadline, publication time frame? Don't we have to publish before we have another, even if it's a special meeting? Don't we have to, can we do that in this time frame?
Yes, you could. So this is not a public hearing. It doesn't have to go in the newspaper or anything like that. It's either, I just did an orientation. I should remember this. I believe it's 48 hours. If not 48, then 72 hours advance notice is necessary. But in any case, if we post it on Friday, you'll be set for whichever time you pick.
Okay.
How about Thursday? I mean, the more time that we have to look at this material and think about it, and the more time that our community members have a chance to look at it, because this will be part of the agenda. How does Thursday look for everybody, Thursday the 25th?
Does not work for me. I can do Wednesday.
Possibly for me, not positive yet. I have to check another schedule.
Wednesday, we have those of us on the history board have a meeting.
Oh, we do?
Mm-hmm.
And I apologize as well, Mr. Chairman. There's a village board meeting here Monday night. My internal calendar is a little off. So you're looking at
Really?
Wednesday or Thursday, yeah.
Okay, well, how about Wednesday? I mean,
I thought you said there was a history meeting.
right, but
Okay.
I would do this before that meeting. Paul, could you make Wednesday?
At the risk of playing hooky from a history museum meeting, yes.
Okay, Lois?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Margaret?
Until 8 p.m.
So maybe we want to start at 6?
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay. And then we need to, Glenn, if you could see if Janie and Randolph can make that. So that's Wednesday, right?
Right.
Wednesday the 24th at 6 o'clock.
And do we want to just see who could attend on Thursday if those other two people can't make it on Wednesday?
Okay, can you make it on Thursday? Sherry?
I have to check another schedule, but it's possible. I can't say
Paul?
certain.
I don't, at this point, I don't think so.
You don't think so?
Right.
Lois?
Probably.
Okay. So, I think Wednesday is preferred, Thursday is as a backup. And we can't do Tuesday? Glenn?
Yeah, the Board of Education meets in this room at 7 o'clock Tuesday.
Yeah, okay.
You know, if
Okay.
if you were to start at 6 and hard stop at 7, perhaps we could do that.
This is gonna take, more than an hour.
We could have some discussion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to have a good discussion. So let's, at this point, consider Wednesday, the 24th, 6 o'clock sharp. We will get, I think we can get out the discussion draft and the spreadsheet on significant properties. If not tomorrow, then Thursday, Glenn?
Certainly.
Okay.
Now, working on that spreadsheet is
Yeah.
a time devourer in its own right. Having spent a fair number of hours working on that and working on other lists of houses, Distinguished Home Awards lists and other things like that, we might want to consider looking at that as sort of as a cursory basis. But if we get into talking about the nitty gritty of the nifty 50 that are on there, or even just the quick 20 that are on there, man, the clock will just fly by, and it'll suddenly be, you know,
Yeah.
be 9:30.
I agree.
Realize.
Yeah. I agree. We're gonna do the discussion draft first. If that takes the entire 2 hours,
We might want to put some sort of, ring around how we're going to discuss the list. So,
yeah, I've got some thoughts around that.
okay, just
Okay.
thoughts.
Some thoughts around that as well. And we don't need to finalize the list. I mean, what we finalize, if we decide to do this, what we finalize is that the list of the double handful list, for want of a better term, will be a subset of the structures rated significant. I mean, that if we agree on that and can have some initial discussion, because the landmarks are there, the National Register are there, so that takes a whole bunch out. There's 122 structures rated significant, by the way, within the village, and there's probably 35 of those or so are either landmarked or National Register. So that's kind of the level of effort that we're looking at. We won't finish it next week. We'll begin it.
Yeah. Most people in the village don't realize how many very significant houses we have in town. People always want to say, oh, well, this little bungalow, this doesn't mean very much. And once you start looking at it and analyzing it and putting some architectural standards to it and stuff, we have a lot of houses that tell a very good story, either architecturally, socially. There's a lot here in Lake Bluff, and so there's some important work here.
Yep. We won't finish that discussion. We'll begin the discussion and we'll develop the process for doing it. What we need to determine is this is how we're going to do it, so we can share that with the village board and with the community going forward.
Good.
All right. Glenn, do you have anything else?
Certainly, I would add, and something to think about. I guess a comment I would add on that, and then a question for the group. So the comment would be just to think about the really. I hope it doesn't sound circular, but to think about the purpose of the Nifty 50. So at previous times, this group has told the village board that it would look at each of these significant rated houses for consideration as landmarks. It predates me, but I believe many of these homeowners have received correspondence from the village in the past, driven by this body, informing people that, they have a house that might be considered for landmark status. If the goal is to prioritize the order in which you review these, that's a different task than simply identifying which homeowners should just receive a letter or receive correspondence. And so where you see this work, which of those on the continuum you see that fitting into, I think that's an important question to keep in mind as we frame our conversation for Wednesday. What I would also suggest, what I would also ask, of course, Chairman Kraus and I will work on this discussion draft. We don't have to go through it now, but I know certainly there's pieces I think we've heard from these feedback sessions that are direction for us as staff to bring you some options about. I know certainly one is just the establishment of a historic district, and another is just this idea of a faster track even for some of these reviews. Certainly, again, doesn't have to be right now, but the more, if you have ideas in mind, the more we can hear about those sooner, the more options we can give you over these next few weeks. And so I would encourage you, I'm happy to jump on the phone or to write, what have you. But the more of that we can hear, the better assistance we can provide you. That would be it.
Okay, anything else from the commission? If not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
I think it was Paul and Margaret for the motion and the second. Roll call vote, please.
Certainly, Member Bergman,
Yes.
Member Minor,
Yes.
Member Nickel,
Yes.
Vice Chair Richardson,
Yes.
and Chair Kraus.
Yes.
Motion carries. You are adjourned.
Thank you. And Glenn, you'll get through with the two members that weren't here and just make sure that Wednesday date applies.
We will certainly do that.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll get back on a regular monthly schedule one of these
Nice
days.
to see everybody.
All right. Take
Good
care.
to see you.
Bye.
Have a good week. Bye-bye.